Hey everyone, hope you're doing great. Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we'll dive into what if Deku was born in a world where quirks are illegal, and Superman is his enemy. Smash that subscribe button, and be sure to peek at the description below. Let's begin. The chime that woke Izuku Midoriya was not an alarm. Alarms were jarring, inefficient things of the past. This was a precisely modulated frequency, designed to gently lift the brain from a delta wave sleep state into full, alert consciousness without the residual grogginess. It was, like everything else in his life, orderly. He sat up, the synthetic sheets whispering against his skin. His window, set to sunrise simulation, was already transitioning from a deep indigo to a soft, rosy orange. Outside the real window, the pre-dawn sky over Muzutafu was a canvas of purple and black, punctuated by the silent, gliding lights of automated transport vehicles and the steady, rhythmic pulse of the Department of Metahuman Control's patrol drones. They were like metallic fireflies, their blue optics sweeping methodically over the clean, quiet streets below. On his bedside hollow clock, the time, 6 o'clock, faded and was replaced by the day's first public service announcement. The face that materialized in the gentle light was familiar, a symbol as ubiquitous as the air they breathed. It was Superman. He wasn't floating in space or striking a heroic pose. He was standing in a wheat field, the golden stalks waving around him, the Kansas sun warm on his face. His expression was calm, earnest, and deeply paternal. "Good morning." His voice, a perfect baritone that resonated with trust and strength, filled the small room. Every sunrise brings a new opportunity, not for a shortcut, not for an easy path, but for the chance to contribute, to build, to strive. The greatest power has always resided within the human spirit, our capacity for diligence, our passion for innovation, our unwavering dedication to one another. That is a power we earn, every single day, remember that. Work hard, be kind, and help build a better, safer tomorrow. The image dissolved back into the time display. Izuku let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. He'd heard variations of that speech every morning for as long as he could remember. It was meant to be inspiring. To Izuku, it felt like a cage whose bars were polished to a mirror shine. He swung his legs out of bed, his feet padding softly on the cool floor. His room was a testament to a divided heart. On one wall, sleek posters of the latest Starkwane Industries space elevator and the global high-speed rail network gleamed. They were marvels of human ingenuity, proof of Superman's philosophy. But on the other wall, hidden behind a panel he'd rigged himself, was a relic. A faded, peeling poster from a bygone era, a time the history vids called the Age of Chaos. It depicted a ridiculously muscular man with a V-shaped smile and two prominent tufts of blonde hair, his fist raised to the sky. All Might. A symbol of a different kind of power, one the world had decided was too dangerous to exist. Izuku slid the panel shut and moved to his desk. It was neat, almost clinically so, except for one item, a worn, green notebook. The cover, once labeled Hero Analysis for the Future, had the first two words aggressively scribbled out. Now, in smaller, more secretive lettering, it read Quirks Sightings. He opened it to the latest entry. Date: last night, approximate 22:47. Location: Takanashi Bridge, West Sector. Subject: unidentified male, approximate 40s, trench coat. Observation: subject was crossing the bridge during the atmospheric ion storm. A DMC drone was struck by lightning and began to fall toward the transport lane below. Subject flinched, his hand shot out. The drone, a 200 kilograms model, stopped its descent 10 meters above the roadway. It hovered for 1.2 seconds before its emergency thrusters engaged. The man immediately pulled his hand back, stuffed it in his pocket, and hurried away. No visible energy signature, no sound. Telekinesis? Gravitational negation? Level 3 or 4 potential. High risk of detection. His pencil scratched a final note in the margin. He looked terrified. They always did. The brief, involuntary flashes of power he documented were never acts of malice. They were moments of instinct, of surprise, of humanity peeking through the cracks of the world's rigid control. A woman whose skin shimmered like diamonds for a split second when a cargo bot startled her. A teenager who jumped from a second-story window to escape a fire and landed with a soft, cat-like grace that defied physics. They were anomalies, genetic deviants, freaks. To Izuku, they were miracles. He was a collector of forbidden secrets. Quirkless himself, a biological baseline in a world that championed it, he was uniquely invisible. No one would ever suspect the quiet, plain-faced boy of being an obsessive chronicler of the very things society had outlawed. The Quirk Suppression Act, passed 80 years ago after the Age of Chaos reached its terrifying zenith with the appearance of a monster named All for One, was absolute. The existence of a quirk had to be registered with the Department of Metahuman Control. Registration meant a life of monitoring, suppression therapy, and limited civil rights. Unregistered quirk use was a federal crime. Violent quirk use was terrorism. And the ultimate enforcer of that law, the one who'd helped humanity put the genie back in the bottle, was Superman. He wasn't a government agent, not officially. He was a symbol, an independent ally of global peace and order. He'd appeared during the worst of the chaos, a being of such immense power that he could have become a king. Instead, he'd used his strength to dismantle the warring quirk factions and help world governments establish a new order. An order based on the principle that his power was an anomaly, an alien gift that should serve to protect humanity from its own worst impulses. The impulse for unearned power. Izuku! Breakfast! His mother's voice called from the kitchen. He slid the notebook into its hidden compartment inside his backpack and headed out. Inko Midoriya was a bundle of nervous energy, her smile a little too bright, her hands fluttering as she plated synth eggs and toasted nutrient paste. She was always worried. In this world, there were two things to fear for your child: that they would be born with a quirk, or that they would be born without one and resent it. Izuku, being the latter, was a source of quiet, constant anxiety for her. "The news is talking about the new orbital ring," she said, gesturing to the large hollow screen on the kitchen wall. A reporter stood in front of a dazzling CGI rendering of a massive space station. "They say it will be fully operational in 5 years. Imagine that, Izuku! Human hands building our future in the stars." Izuku nodded, spooning the tasteless but nutritionally perfect eggs into his mouth. "Yeah. It's amazing." He watched the screen. The report cut to a brief statement from Lex Luthor, the head of LexCorp and a primary architect of the New World Order. His face was sharp, intelligent, and utterly confident. "We triumph not by chance, but by design," Luthor said. "Humanity's greatest asset is the mind. We have chosen to climb the mountain, not be airlifted to the summit. It is a slower, harder path, but the view is one we will have earned." The screen then showed a clip of Superman, effortlessly lifting a multi-ton segment of the orbital ring into place. The irony was so thick Izuku could have choked on it. They talked of earned strength while their entire system of order was guaranteed by a being with the most unearned power in existence. "Oh, be careful on your way to school, sweetie," Inko said, her brow furrowed with concern. "I saw on the neighborhood net that DMC patrols are elevated in our district. Just keep your head down. Don't go looking for trouble. Don't go looking for miracles," he translated in his head. "I won't, Mom," he promised, the lie tasting more bitter than the nutrient paste. The Aldera Junior High campus was a monument to brutalist efficiency. Gray, clean, and imposing, it was designed to foster focus and discourage frivolity. The lesson of the day in social history was, predictably, the Quirk Suppression Act. Mr. Aizawa, a man who looked perpetually exhausted by the sheer effort of existing, gestured lazily at a holographic timeline on the wall. It depicted mushroom clouds, ruined cities, and terrifying figures clashing, the official record of the Age of Chaos. "As you know," he droned, his voice flat, "the emergence of quirks was not a leap in evolution. It was a societal cancer. Power without discipline, strength without wisdom. It led to the rise of villains like All for One, who treated entire cities as his personal playgrounds." The timeline shifted, showing a black and white photo of a young, determined Superman shaking hands with the world leaders who would sign the QSA. It was only with the intervention of Superman and the unified resolve of non-powered humanity that order was restored. "We chose a different path. A path of shared progress, not individual power. The QSA isn't a punishment, it's a shield. It protects us from chaos. It protects those with the affliction, from themselves, a hand shot up in the back. It was Katsuki Bakugo. The entire class tensed. Bakugo was a walking contradiction. He exuded an aura of explosive arrogance, yet his posture was coiled tight, like a spring wound to the breaking point. His crimson eyes scanned the room, daring anyone to meet his gaze. He bullied Izuku, not with the casual cruelty of other kids, but with a focused, almost desperate intensity. What if? Bakugo's voice was a low growl, a rumble of thunder before a storm. But power isn't a sickness? What if it's just more? What if we're meant to be more? Mr. Aizawa sighed, a sound of infinite weariness. That is the kind of thinking that burned down half of Tokyo, Bakugo. The desire to be more at the expense of everyone else is the definition of selfishness. Humanity is a collective. We rise together through hard work. End of story. Bakugo didn't argue. He just slumped back in his chair, his hands clenched into fists on his desk. Izuku watched him from the corner of his eye. He could see the faint tremor in Bakugo's shoulders. He could smell it, too, a faint, sharp scent, like burnt sugar and ozone. It always hung around Bakugo, a constant, suppressed aroma of nitroglycerin. Later, as the bell for lunch shrieked through the halls, Izuku felt a hand clamp down on his shoulder. It was hot, unnaturally so. Deku. Izuku flinched at the old, cruel nickname. Useless. Keikaken. Bakugo spun him around, slamming him lightly against the lockers. It wasn't a violent shove, but it was controlling. His face was inches from Izuku's, his red eyes burning with a terrifying mixture of rage and fear. What were you staring at? Bakugo snarled, his voice a harsh whisper. And nothing, Kaken, I swear. Liar. You're always staring. Always watching. Taking your creepy little notes. Bakugo's grip tightened. Izuku could feel a crackling energy through the fabric of his uniform. A tiny, almost invisible wisp of smoke curled from where Bakugo's palm pressed into his shoulder. This was the core of their dynamic. Bakugo had a quirk. A powerful one. Izuku knew it, and Bakugo knew that he knew. It was their terrible, shared secret. Bakugo's entire life was a performance of normalcy, a desperate effort to contain the raging inferno inside him. His explosions, when they slipped out, were tiny, pathetic things, a pen melting in his grip, a scorch mark on his shoe, a sharp pop when he got angry that he tried to pass off as static electricity. He was a caged god, and his rage was directed at the one person who saw the bars. Izuku, the quirkless, useless Deku, was free in a way Bakugo could never be. He didn't have to live in constant fear of a stray spark betraying him to the DMC. The system that tormented Bakugo simply ignored Izuku. And Bakugo hated him for it. You think you're better than me? Bakugo whispered, his breath hot. Because you're normal? Because you're what he wants? The unspoken he hung in the air between them. Superman. No, Kaken, Izuku said, his voice trembling but honest. I don't. Bakugo seemed to search his face for a lie. Finding none, his rage seemed to deflate, replaced by a deep, hollow frustration. He shoved Izuku away, a small, sharp crackle popping in the air between them. Just stay the hell away from me, he growled, turning and stalking down the hall, his hands shoved deep into his pockets as if to physically restrain them. Izuku leaned against the lockers, his heart hammering. He touched his shoulder. It was warm, and the fabric of his uniform smelled faintly of smoke. He didn't see a bully. He saw a prisoner rattling his cage. He pulled out a small, pocket-sized notebook, a companion to his main one, and made a quick, coded note. KB. Increased thermal output. Audible energy discharge. Controls slipping under stress. He's getting worse. He felt a profound, aching pity for Katsuki Bakugo. And he knew, with absolute certainty, that if Kaken ever found that out, he would probably kill him. The final bell was a release. Izuku packed his bag, the hidden weight of his secret notebook a familiar burden. He usually took the most direct route home, a path under the watchful eyes of countless public surveillance cameras and DMC drones. It was the safest way. Today, he didn't. The confrontation with Bakugo had left him unsettled, his mind buzzing with the injustice of it all. He needed to walk. He needed to think. He turned down a side street, into the older, quieter residential sectors of Muzdalifa. Here, the buildings were shorter, the streets narrower. It was a remnant of the pre-Qusay world, too historically significant to demolish but too inefficient to be considered prime real estate. It was a place where things could be missed. He walked for nearly an hour, his path meandering. He watched an old woman meticulously watering her prize-winning roses, her hands gnarled with age and hard work, earned beauty, a PSA might have said. He saw children playing a complex game of tag in a small park, their movements purely athletic, with no impossible leaps or bursts of speed. It was the world Superman had built. Peaceful, orderly, safe, and it felt profoundly wrong. It was a soft sound that drew his attention. A child's cry. Not a wail of pain, but a frustrated whimper. It came from a narrow alleyway nestled between two quaint, old-fashioned apartment buildings. Izuku's internal alarm, the one honed by years of secret observation, went off. He slowed his pace, pretending to check his phone as he angled himself for a better view. The alley was tidy, lined with recycling bins. A little girl, no older than 5, with bright pink hair tied in pigtails, was standing there, tears welling in her big, brown eyes. In front of her, on the ground, lay a small, silver toy rocket ship. As he watched, she sniffled, hiccuped, and reached out a chubby hand. The toy wobbled. It lifted an inch off the ground, then another. It floated, gently spinning, into her waiting grasp. A simple, innocent, beautiful act of minor telekinesis. A wave of warmth spread through Izuku's chest. It was a real one. A quirk, happening right in front of him. It was pure and harmless. The girl hugged the rocket ship, her tears already forgotten, a small smile gracing her lips. Then, he heard a second sound. The whisper-quiet hum of an electric engine. A black, unmarked van had pulled up to the mouth of the alley, blocking the only exit. It had no lights, no sirens, no insignia. It was brutally anonymous. 2 figures emerged. They were dressed in charcoal gray tactical gear, their faces obscured by reflective visors that mirrored the terrified expression of a man who had just stepped out of one of the apartment doors. The girl's father. "Please," the man began, his hands raised in a placating gesture. "She's just a child. She doesn't understand. We were going to register her, I swear. We were just waiting." The DMC officers didn't respond. They moved with a chilling, synchronized grace. One officer raised a device that looked like a complicated remote control. A shimmering, blue field of energy flickered around the little girl. She gasped, and the rocket ship in her hands clattered to the pavement, suddenly inert. Her power was gone. "No!" a woman screamed, rushing out of the apartment. The girl's mother. "Don't touch my baby!" The second officer moved to intercept her, not with violence, but with an immovable, physical presence. He was a wall of impassive gray armor. "Ma'am, cooperation will ensure a smoother transition for your child. Please do not resist." His voice was a monotone, completely devoid of inflection or emotion. It was the voice of a machine executing a program. The little girl, now terrified and confused, began to cry in earnest, reaching for her parents. "Mommy! Daddy!" The first officer knelt down. He didn't touch her. He simply produced a small, glowing disc and attached it to the collar of her dress. A suppression collar. It would dampen her quirk indefinitely. He then placed a gentle but firm hand on her shoulder and guided her toward the van. Izuku was frozen, hidden behind a large planter a dozen meters away. His breath was caught in his throat. His heart felt like a block of ice in his chest. This wasn't a raid. It wasn't a dramatic confrontation. It was a quiet, cold, soul-crushing abduction. It was pest control. The father broke. He lunged forward, a desperate, primal roar tearing from his throat. "Get away from her!" The second officer didn't even flinch. He raised his own device. A thin beam of red light shot out, and the father collapsed, his body convulsing for a moment before lying still, unconscious. "Taro!" the mother shrieked, her face a mask of pure horror. "He is sedated," the officer stated, as if giving a weather report. "He will be processed separately. You will come with us. It is the law." They led the weeping mother and the stunned, silent child to the back of the van. The doors slid shut with a soft, final hiss. The van's engine hummed back to life, and it pulled away from the curb as silently as it had arrived, leaving only an unconscious man and a small, silver toy rocket ship in the quiet alley. The entire event had taken less than 90 seconds. Izuku's hands were shaking so violently he could barely hold his backpack strap. He felt sick. Bile rose in his throat. He stumbled back, away from the alley, away from the scene. He ran. He didn't know where he was going, he just ran, the orderly streets of Muzidafu blurring into a gray prison around him. The clean air felt suffocating. The silent drones felt like vultures. The peace felt like a lie. He didn't remember the walk home. He found himself standing in his own room, the door closed, his back pressed against it as if to keep the world out. His body was trembling with a cocktail of emotions he couldn't name: rage, sorrow, and above all, a profound and sickening sense of helplessness. He had documented dozens of quirk sightings, but he had never witnessed the consequence. He had never seen the cold, sterile mechanics of the system in action. The quiet efficiency was more terrifying than any battle. There was no villain to fight, no monster to punch. There was only the system. Order. The law. His gaze fell upon his desk. Next to his school monitor was a small, framed picture from his 10th birthday. He was a small, freckled boy with a wide, toothy grin, wearing a homemade Superman cape. Standing next to him was his mother, smiling. It had been his favorite birthday. He believed in heroes then. He believed in Superman. With a numb, mechanical movement, he turned on his main screen. He didn't have to search for the news. It was the lead story on every channel. A polished, professional anchorwoman smiled into the camera. In local news, the Department of Metahuman Control today successfully contained a potential public safety risk in Muzidafu's west sector. Officials report that an unregistered Level 2 kinetic was identified and neutralized without incident. DMC officials remind citizens that early registration is the safest path for everyone. And now, for a special address from a man who needs no introduction. The screen changed. It was Superman. He was floating in front of the United Nations building in New York, a symbol of global unity. His expression was serious, but kind. His voice boomed with gentle authority. "My friends," he began. "Today, I once again watched humanity do what it does best. Protect itself. I have seen civilizations on other worlds crumble under the weight of unearned power. I have seen what happens when the temptation of a genetic shortcut replaces the virtue of hard work. It breeds conflict. It breeds arrogance. It breeds chaos. It is a poison that promises strength but delivers only ruin." He looked directly into the camera, and for a second, Izuku felt as if those piercing blue eyes were looking right at him, right through him. "The laws you have created, the order you have built, are a testament to your wisdom. The work of agencies like the DMC is difficult, but it is essential. They are not taking something away, they are giving you a future. A future where your child's success is determined by their character and their effort, not by a roll of the genetic dice. A future where we are all judged by the content of our minds and the strength of our spirit." He smiled, and it was the same warm, paternal smile from the morning PSA. "Humanity's potential is limitless. You are proving that every day. You don't need quirks. You only need each other. Stay the course. Keep building. Keep striving. I will be here to watch over you. Always." The broadcast ended. Izuku stared at the blank screen. The words echoed in his silent room. "They are not taking something away, they are giving you a future." He thought of the little girl's confused, terrified face. He thought of her father, lying unconscious on the cold pavement. He thought of her mother's shriek of despair. He thought of the little silver rocket ship, abandoned in an alley. A future. Slowly, deliberately, he walked over to his desk. He picked up the framed photo of his 10th birthday self, grinning in his cheap red cape. He looked at the face of the boy who had once believed in Superman, who had once worshipped the man of tomorrow. With a quiet, final click, he removed the picture from its frame. He slid it into a drawer, out of sight. His enemy wasn't a monster. His enemy wasn't some cackling villain. His enemy was the world's greatest hero. And the war had just begun inside his own heart. The world had not changed. That was the most sickening part. The day after Izuku had witnessed the cold, quiet dismantling of a family, the sun rose with the same engineered politeness. The nutrient paste tasted just as bland. The holographic newscasters smiled with the same placid confidence. The man of tomorrow's morning address spoke of unity and earned strength. His voice a balm intended to soothe the populace Izuku now saw as prisoners in a beautifully manicured garden. But Izuku had changed. The garden's walls, once invisible, were now all he could see. Walking to school was a torment. Every gliding DMC patrol car sent a jolt of ice through his veins. He saw their reflective visors and pictured the little girl's terrified eyes. He heard their silent engines and remembered the final, soft hiss of the van doors. He found himself watching every passerby with a new, frantic intensity. Did the businessman whose briefcase slipped have to consciously stop himself from catching it with a flicker of psychokinesis? Did the young woman who stumbled on the curb suppress an instinct to right herself with a burst of impossible agility? The world was a minefield of forbidden potential, and he was suddenly, agonizingly aware of every single mine. He spent the day in a fog of quiet fury. Mr. Aizawa's lecture on the efficiencies of post-quirk global logistics was meaningless static. The mathematical precision of his physics lesson felt like a mockery of the messy, unpredictable, beautiful chaos he had seen in that alley. He even avoided looking at Katsuki Bakugo. He couldn't bear it. He couldn't look at Kaken, a living, breathing, seething testament to the world's hypocrisy, without feeling the helpless rage from the day before bubble up inside him. Every frustrated sigh from Bakugo, every tightly clenched fist, was a silent scream against the system. A scream Izuku was only now beginning to understand. When the final chime released them, Izuku couldn't face the main thoroughfares. He couldn't stand the open, monitored spaces, the giant hollow screens broadcasting Superman's reassuring smile. The smile felt like a threat now. A promise of serene, gentle annihilation for anyone who dared to be different. He needed shadows. He needed grime. He needed a place where the world's polished veneer had cracked. He turned off the main street and ducked into the labyrinth of back alleys and underpasses that formed the city's forgotten circulatory system. This was the route he'd always been told to avoid. It was poorly lit, littered with discarded food containers and old shipping pallets. The air was thick with the smell of damp concrete and ozone from the nearby train lines. It was imperfect. It was real, and for the first time, it felt safer than the pristine streets above. He walked with his head down, his hands shoved in his pockets, the worn fabric of his green notebook a secret comfort in his backpack. He was replaying the incident in his mind, etching every detail into his memory. The blue flicker of the suppression field. The father's desperate lunge. The silent red beam of the sedative rifle. It was in the deepest part of the underpass, where the sunlight struggled to reach and the constant drip of water echoed off the walls, that he heard it. "Stay back! I swear to God, stay back!" The voice was gargled, thick with panic. Izuku froze, pressing himself into an alcove behind a row of corroded metal lockers. He peered around the edge. 50 meters away, a scene of pure chaos was unfolding. A monstrous form composed of viscous, green-black sludge was oozing its way out of a sewer grate. It was vaguely humanoid, but its shape was constantly shifting, dripping, and reforming. Trapped within its gelatinous mass, like a fly in amber, was a man's face, his eyes wide with terror, his mouth opening and closing in panicked gulps for air. This was the source of the voice. This was the sludge villain. But he wasn't a villain. Not in the way the old stories told. He wasn't cackling or making demands. He was retreating. He was terrified. Izuku could see the faint blue shimmer of DMC sensor lights painting the walls at the far end of the tunnel. He was being hunted. "I don't want to hurt anyone," the sludge man gurgled, his body quivering. "I just want to get away. Let me go!" He was a cornered animal. A desperate quirk user who had been discovered, and was now running for his life. Izuku's heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic drumbeat of fear and a strange, terrible empathy. And then, as if the universe had a cruel sense of dramatic timing, another figure entered the underpass from the opposite end. He was walking with an angry, purposeful stride, his school bag slung carelessly over one shoulder. His blonde, spiky hair was an unmistakable silhouette against the dim light. Katsuki Bakugo. He, too, had chosen the shadows today. He hadn't seen the sludge creature yet. His head was down, his hands were jammed in his pockets, and a low, furious muttering was emanating from him. Stupid, useless, damn world, the sludge villain saw him. A new kind of desperation flashed in the man's trapped eyes. An opportunity. A shield. Before Izuku could even think to scream a warning, the sludge creature surged forward. It moved with a sickening, liquid speed, a wave of filth and despair. Kaken! Izuku's voice was a choked whisper, lost in the damp air. Bakugo looked up, his crimson eyes widening in shock just a second too late. The wave hit him. The sludge was on him, around him, consuming him. It poured into his mouth, his nose, a living, breathing tide of suffocation. He thrashed wildly, a muffled cry of pure terror escaping him before he was fully engulfed. Now I have a hostage! The villain shrieked, his voice gaining a sliver of confidence. He turned to face the approaching DMC lights. A shield! You can't shoot me now! Back off! Izuku watched, paralyzed with horror. He could see Bakugo's form struggling within the translucent muck. His arms and legs flailed uselessly. His face, contorted in a silent scream, was pressed against the surface of the sludge. This was it. This was Bakugo's ultimate nightmare. Not just death, but a helpless, humiliating death, his secret power a useless inferno trapped inside him, drowning in filth. 2 DMC officers in their standard gray tactical gear appeared at the end of the tunnel, their stun rifles raised. They were followed by a floating drone that bathed the scene in a harsh, analytical light. Subject has acquired a hostage, one officer stated, his voice flat and metallic through his helmet's speaker. Hostage is a juvenile male. Vital signs are critical. Do not engage, the second officer commanded. Subject is a confirmed Class 4 amorphous entity. Standard protocols are insufficient. Call for a Level 5 cryo-containment unit. ETA is 6 minutes. 6 minutes? Izuku's mind reeled. 6 minutes? Bakugo would be dead in 2. They weren't heroes. They were risk managers. They were following a flowchart. A life was less important than the protocol designed to contain the threat. The system he'd begun to hate yesterday was going to murder his childhood friend through sheer, bureaucratic indifference. Inside the sludge, Bakugo was beginning to lose consciousness. His struggles weakened. But as the oxygen deprivation set in, something else was happening. A primal instinct, deeper than thought, deeper than fear, was taking over. The cage was breaking. A faint orange light began to pulse from within the green-black mass. It was dim at first, like a dying ember. The sludge around Bakugo's hands began to sizzle and steam. The villain grunted in pain. What? Stop it! Stop struggling! Bakugo couldn't hear him. He was lost in a red haze of terror and rage. All his life, he had been told this power was a curse. A disease. A secret to be buried, to be ashamed of. His parents had drilled it into him, their faces etched with fear. Never, Katsuki. Never let anyone see. They'll take you away. The world had told him his very nature was a crime. He had suppressed it, choked it, hated it. He had funneled all that volcanic pressure into a brittle shell of arrogance and rage, directed at the world, at his parents, and most of all, at the quirkless, useless, free Deku who saw right through him. Now, drowning and helpless, with the cold indifference of the law watching him die, the pressure had nowhere else to go. The dam of a lifetime of suppression began to crack. Let me out, a voice that was his but not his screamed in his mind. Let me breathe. The orange glow intensified, turning a brilliant, furious white. The air in the underpass grew hot, the moisture steaming off the concrete walls. The smell of ozone and burned sugar, Kaken's smell, filled the air, thick and potent. The DMC officers took a step back. Warning! The drone's synthesized voice announced. Unidentified energy signature detected. High-level thermal and kinetic readings. It's the hostage! One of the officers yelled, a crack of genuine alarm in his voice. He's a latent metahuman! Bakugo's eyes, visible through the sludge, snapped open. They were no longer the eyes of a terrified boy. They were twin sons of pure, unadulterated power. He let out a silent, internal roar, and unleashed everything. It wasn't a boom. It was a crack. It was the sound of reality breaking. For a single, silent moment, a sphere of blinding white light erupted from the center of the sludge monster. Then came the shockwave. It wasn't just sound. It was a physical wall of force that tore through the underpass. It vaporized the sludge, atomizing the desperate man within it into nothingness. It slammed into Izuku, throwing him back against the lockers with a bone-jarring impact. It sent the DMC officers tumbling, their rifles clattering across the ground. The drone was swatted from the air like a fly, smashing into the ceiling in a shower of sparks. The entire underpass was scoured clean. The years of grime were gone, blasted away by the sheer force of the explosion. The air tasted of lightning, and in the center of it all, in a newly formed crater in the asphalt, knelt Katsuki Bakugo. He was on his hands and knees, smoke pouring from his skin. His uniform was shredded, his arms burned and bleeding. He was gasping for air, each breath a ragged, painful heave. The silence that followed the explosion was absolute, broken only by his ragged panting and the drip of water from a broken pipe overhead. He slowly, shakily, lifted his hands. They were trembling, glowing with a faint residual heat. He stared at them. He stared at the destruction he had wrought. This was it. This was the monster they'd always told him he was. He had hidden it, fought it, denied it, and in the end, it had broken free and proven them all right. The look on his face was not one of triumph. It was not relief. It was a look of utter, soul-shattering horror. He had just saved his own life by committing the greatest crime a person could commit. He was no longer Katsuki Bakugo, the angry kid from Aldera. He was an unregistered, high-level quirk user who had just deployed his power with lethal force in a public space. He was a fugitive. A monster, a dead man walking. The two DMC officers were staggering to their feet, their training reasserting itself. One was already speaking into his comms, his voice tight with shock. Code Black. I repeat, Code Black, unregistered emitter, Class 5 or higher. We need him. Now, him. Superman. Izuku's mind snapped back into focus. He saw it all in a horrifying flash forward, Superman arriving in a streak of red and blue. The look of disappointment on his face. Kaken being taken away, not to a re-education facility, but to a black site, a place for monsters like him. A life in a cage, or no life at all. He saw the look on Kaken's face. The same hopeless terror he'd seen in the eyes of the little girl's father. And something inside Izuku Midoriya, something that had been dormant and afraid his entire life, finally broke. His legs moved before his brain gave the command. He burst from behind the lockers, his worn red sneakers slapping against the cratered ground. DKU? Bakugo choked out, his head snapping up, his eyes wide with disbelief and a flicker of his old, familiar rage. What are you? The DMC officers turned, startled by his sudden appearance. Civilian! Get back! One of them shouted, raising his rifle. Izuku didn't stop. He didn't have a plan. He had nothing but his backpack and a desperate, burning need to rewrite the ending of this story. He was a quirkless, useless nobody running toward a scene that could get him killed, but for the first time in his life, he felt a sense of purpose that was stronger than his fear. He unslung his backpack as he ran, swinging it around his head. He wasn't aiming for the officers. He was aiming for the broken water pipe above them. Kaken! He screamed, his voice raw and cracking with emotion. He hurled the backpack with all his might. It spun through the air, striking the damaged pipe with a loud clang. A torrent of rusty water gushed down, drenching the two officers and shorting out their comms equipment with a fizz of sparks. It was a distraction. A moment of chaos. A 2-second window. He skidded to a halt in front of Bakugo, planting his feet, his arms spread wide as if to shield him. He was trembling from head to toe, but his eyes were blazing. This isn't you! He yelled, his voice echoing in the ruined underpass. He wasn't talking to the officers. He was talking to Bakugo, to the boy kneeling in the wreckage of his own power, looking at his hands like they were poison. That explosion! That wasn't a monster! That was you, trying to live! It's yours, Kakin! You can control it! You have to control it! He was shouting a heresy. In a world where quirks were a disease to be suppressed, he was screaming that it was a part of him. That it could be controlled. That it could be his. For a split second, Bakugo's expression of horror was replaced by one of stunned confusion. The word control seemed to hit him like a physical blow. It was a concept he'd never once been offered. The moment was shattered by a new sound. Or rather, a lack of one. The air grew still. The dripping water seemed to hang in the air. A shadow fell over them, a shadow so vast and sudden it seemed to swallow the dim light of the underpass hole. Izuku felt a presence. It wasn't the clinical threat of the DMC or the awesome, orderly power of Superman. This was something ancient, something primal. He looked up. A figure was descending from a hole in the underpass ceiling, a hole that hadn't been there a moment ago. He didn't fly. He seemed to simply fall with impossible slowness, his long, tattered coat billowing around him like the wings of a dying crow. He was a scarecrow caught in a hurricane. Impossibly tall and skeletal, his body was a wreck. His face was all sharp angles and sunken hollows, his cheeks so gaunt they looked like they had been carved from bone. A deep, permanent shadow was cast over his eyes, but from within that darkness, 2 points of brilliant blue light burned with an intensity that defied the frailness of his body. His blonde hair, thin and lifeless, hung in 2 distinct, V-shaped bangs on either side of his skeletal face. It was a ghost. A legend. A figure from the history vids, the #1 domestic terrorist on the planet, All Might. He landed without a sound, his bare feet touching the ground with impossible gentleness. The 2 DMC officers, their systems rebooting from the water damage, just stared, their weapons forgotten. They were looking at a myth. All Might's burning blue eyes swept over the scene. They took in the destroyed underpass, the incapacitated officers, the trembling form of Izuku, and the broken, kneeling figure of Bakugo. A flicker of something, sadness? Recognition, passed through them. He moved. It wasn't speed as Izuku understood it. It was an absence of transition. One moment he was standing 10 feet away, the next he was there. He moved past Izuku, a whisper of displaced air in his wake. One long, bony hand shot out and tapped the back of the dazed sludge villain's original body, which had just begun to reform into a puddle, on a specific nerve cluster. The sludge instantly lost all cohesion and dissolved into a harmless, inert green liquid. Then, before anyone could react, he turned. One hand, a grip of surprising, wiry strength, clamped down on the collar of Izuku's uniform. The other grabbed the back of Bakugo's shredded shirt, lifting him effortlessly from the ground. "What?" was all Izuku could manage. "Hold on, my boys!" A voice rasped, a voice that was a shadow of the booming laugh from the old videos, but still held a core of unshakable power. And then the world dissolved. All Might pushed off the ground, and the underpass, the DMC officers, the entire world Izuku knew, simply vanished beneath them in a dizzying, incomprehensible rush of wind and force. The city lights became streaks, the sounds of the street blended into a single, roaring tone. Izuku squeezed his eyes shut, his stomach lurching, the grip on his collar the only thing anchoring him to reality. He was flying. Or falling. He couldn't tell. He was being carried away from the wreckage of his old life by the world's most wanted man, a terrified, explosive boy clutched in the ghost's other hand. The orderly world of Superman was gone, and they were falling headfirst into the chaos. The journey was not a flight. It was a violation of physics. Izuku's world compressed into a terrifying, visceral blur. The wind was a physical wall, stealing the air from his lungs and plastering his eyelids shut. The roar of their passage was so absolute it felt like silence. He had a fleeting, disconnected thought that this must be what it felt like to be a bullet. He was no longer a person, but an object being moved from one point to another with impossible, brutal efficiency. The only constant was the surprisingly firm grip of the skeletal hand on his collar, an anchor in a storm of sensory overload. Just as he felt his consciousness beginning to fray, the assault stopped. The sudden deceleration was as violent as the acceleration. His stomach tried to climb into his throat. He stumbled, his legs buckling, and would have collapsed if the hand hadn't held him up. He gasped, sucking in air that was stale and cool, thick with the smell of dust, rust, and something metallic and old, like forgotten machinery. He blinked, trying to clear the spots from his vision. They were in darkness. Not the total blackness of a void, but the deep, heavy gloom of a place long sealed away from the sun. A single, bare bulb flickered to life overhead with a low hum, casting long, distorted shadows across the space. They were in some kind of bunker. The walls were thick, unpainted concrete, stained with age and watermarks. Pipes and conduits snaked across the low ceiling. In one corner sat a bank of outdated communications equipment, their screens dark and dusty. In another, a cot was neatly made, a threadbare blanket folded at its end. It was a space built for survival, not comfort. A tomb for someone not yet dead. All Might release them. Izuku staggered back, his legs feeling like jelly. Bakugo, dropped unceremoniously, landed on his hands and knees, his body still trembling with the aftershocks of his explosive outburst and the disorienting journey. He stayed there, head bowed, his blonde hair hiding his face. The skeletal figure of All Might turned to face them. In the stark light of the single bulb, he looked even more spectral. His form was a collection of sharp, painful angles, his tattered black coat hanging off his frame. He seemed less like a man and more like an idea held together by sheer willpower. The 2 points of blue fire in the deep shadows of his eye sockets were fixed on them, analytical and weary. "You two have had a rather eventful afternoon," he rasped. The voice was a ghost of the one from the history vids, a gravelly whisper where a booming laugh used to be. A profound, rattling cough shook his entire frame, and he pressed a thin hand to his mouth. When he pulled it away, Izuku saw a dark smear of blood on his knuckles. Izuku's mind was a frantic whirlwind. This was All Might. The symbol of peace from the age of chaos. The man who supposedly fought all for one to a standstill before vanishing. The world had painted him as a terrorist, a holdout from a barbaric era who refused to accept the new world order. The history books said he represented the very chaos Superman had saved them from. But standing here, looking at this broken, dying man, Izuku didn't see a monster. He saw a tragedy. You're... Izuku stammered, his brain finally catching up with his eyes. A relic. All Might finished for him, a flicker of a grim, humorless smile touching his thin lips. A ghost at the feast. You can call me Toshinori Yagi. All Might was a name for a different time. He gestured vaguely at their surroundings. Welcome to one of the few places his eyes can't see. An old sub-level of the Quirk Liberation Front. The QLF? Izuku breathed the name. They were bogeymen. A scattered, underground network of radicals and quirk users who resisted the QSA. The news portrayed them as anarchists, terrorists who wanted to drag the world back into the fire. The media is a powerful weapon, Yagi said, as if reading his mind. His gaze drifted to Bakugo, who still hadn't moved. And you, young man? You have a fire in you. A dangerous fire. Bakugo's head snapped up. His face was a mess of tear tracks, grime, and blood. But his eyes were burning with a desperate, cornered fury. What do you want? He snarled, his voice raw. Gonna turn me in? Collect a bounty? Or recruit me for your little terrorist club? Yagi's expression didn't change. Terrorist? Is that what they call us now? I suppose it fits their narrative. Tell me, was it terrorism when you fought to breathe? Was it anarchy when you refused to die? The question struck Bakugo like a physical blow. His jaw worked, but no sound came out. The simple reframing of his actions, from a monstrous crime to a desperate act of survival, was something his mind, conditioned by a lifetime of fear and suppression, couldn't process. Yagi took a slow, deliberate step forward. They have told you your entire life that what is inside you is a disease. A flaw. A crime waiting to happen. They have taught you to hate a part of yourself, to fear your own nature. They did not do this for your safety. They did it for their control. He turned his gaze to Izuku. And you? You ran in. No power, no weapon, nothing but a school bag and a shout. Why? Izuku's throat felt tight. He thought of the alley. The little girl. The father. He thought of Bakugo, kneeling in the crater, his face a mask of self-loathing. Because they were going to let him die, he said, his voice trembling but firm. The officers, they just stood there. They were waiting, and Kaken, he looked so. He trailed off, unable to articulate the profound despair he had seen in his friend's eyes. It was wrong, he finished simply. A soft, genuine smile, the first Izuku had seen, briefly lit up Yagi's skeletal face. It was a faint echo of the magnificent, V-shaped grin from the old posters, and for a moment, Izuku could see the hero he once was. It was wrong, Yagi repeated softly. In a world that has codified indifference into law, that is a revolutionary statement, young man. He walked over to the bank of dusty computer terminals and sank onto a worn-out office chair that creaked in protest. He seemed to shrink, the brief flash of heroic energy gone, replaced by an bone-deep weariness. You two need to understand the world you're living in, he said, his voice low and serious. Not the sanitized history they feed you in school. The truth, he gestured to the concrete walls around them. The age of chaos wasn't just random. Yes, the sudden, widespread emergence of quirks caused upheaval. People were scared. Power in the hands of the undisciplined is a dangerous thing. But it wasn't an apocalypse. It was evolution. A messy, painful, glorious leap forward. We were adapting. We were learning. We were becoming more. His gaze became distant, lost in a painful memory. And then came All for One. He was not a product of the chaos. He was its architect. He could steal quirks, stockpile them, give them away. He gathered followers, built an empire from the shadows. He preyed on the fear and confusion. He found those with powerful quirks and turned them into monsters. He found those who were afraid and offered them power in exchange for their loyalty. He stoked the fires, orchestrated the disasters. He wanted a world ruled by a single, ultimate power, his. He paused, taking a ragged breath. I fought him. Others fought him. We were winning. Slowly, painfully, we were pushing him back. We were showing the world that quirks could be used for good, that a hero was not defined by their power, but by their choice to use it for others. We were on the verge of creating a new kind of society. He looked up, and the blue fire in his eyes burned with a cold, ancient anger. And that's when he arrived. Izuku knew who he meant. There was only one he that mattered. Superman, Yagi said, the name tasting like ash in his mouth. He came from the sky, a god in blue and red. He saw the fire, the destruction, the fighting, and he didn't see the nuances. He didn't see the struggle between order and tyranny, between heroism and villainy. He saw only chaos. He saw a flawed, self-destructive species that needed to be saved from itself. All for One was the perfect villain for him. A monster born of unchecked quirk power. Superman and the world's governments used him, used my nemesis, as the ultimate justification. They fought together to bring him down. But they didn't stop there. They didn't target the sickness, they targeted the symptom. They decided that the potential for another All for One was too great a risk, so they made the potential itself the crime. He gestured expansively, his thin arm encompassing the entire world outside their bunker. The Quirk Suppression Act. It wasn't about safety. It was about control. It was about forcing humanity down a single, predictable, manageable path. They threw the baby out with the bathwater, and called it progress. They traded the messy, vibrant, dangerous potential of evolution for the sterile, quiet, predictable order of a cage. And Superman, he became the warden, the benevolent, smiling warden who genuinely believes the prisoners are happier inside. The story settled over the room, thick and suffocating. It was a complete inversion of everything Izuku had ever been taught. The hero of his world was the architect of its prison. The villain of his world was a freedom fighter. It was too much. But he saves people, Izuku argued weakly. It was a reflexive defense, a remnant of a lifetime of conditioning. From fires, from natural disasters, he helps. He maintains the status quo, Yagi countered, his voice sharp. He stops the train from crashing, but he makes sure it never, ever leaves the tracks. He performs miracles to reinforce the idea that miracles should be left to him alone. His every heroic act is a sermon, preaching the gospel of human inadequacy. You cannot handle this power, he says with every life he saves. Leave it to me. You stick to what you're good at, earning your place. It is the most insidious form of control imaginable. Bakugo, who had been silent through all of this, finally spoke. His voice was rough, choked. So what was the point? He asked, looking at Yagi. Why grab us? To tell us a bedtime story about how screwed we are? I grabbed you, Yagi said, his gaze locking onto Bakugo's. Because you are proof. You are what they are so terrified of. Raw, untamed potential, and I grabbed you. He shifted his eyes to Izuku. Because you are the one thing their system can't account for. A heroic spirit, born without a drop of power to your name. A selfless heart in a world that preaches self-interest thinly disguised as collective progress. He leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, the intensity in his eyes making him seem larger, more solid. I have been watching you, Izuku Midoriya. For a while now, your notebooks, your analysis, you see the world not just as it is, but as it could be. You see the potential in others that they themselves are taught to fear. You saw it in your friend here. Even as he was drowning in despair, Izuku felt a flush of heat creep up his neck. He thought he was invisible. A ghost. But this other ghost had been watching him. Yagi stood up, and for the first time, he pulled his tattered coat aside. He lifted his shirt. Izuku gasped. Bakugo recoiled with a soft curse. The left side of Yagi's torso was a ruin. A catastrophic, swirling vortex of scarred tissue. So deep and twisted it looked as if his entire side had been caved in by a colossal, crushing force. It was a wound that should have killed any man 10 times over. This is what All for One left me with, in our final, secret battle, Yagi said, his voice flat. It took most of my stomach, one of my lungs. I can only be a hero for a few minutes a day, if I push myself. The rest of the time, I am this. He gestured to his skeletal form. A flickering ember, he let the shirt fall. I have been searching. For years. For someone to carry on the fight. For someone who understands that true strength isn't about the power you're born with, but the will to use it for others. He took a step toward Izuku, his burning blue eyes boring into him. My quirk is not like yours, young Bakugo. It is not something I was born with. It is a torch passed down from one generation to the next, a sacred trust. It is the crystallization of power, stockpiled over time, meant to fight for those who cannot fight for themselves. It is called One for All, One for All. The name was a perfect antithesis to All for One. Izuku's mind, the mind of an analyst, a dreamer, a secret historian, lit up. A stockpiling quirk. A transferable quirk. A legacy. In a world where unearned power is the ultimate sin, Yagi said, his voice dropping to a low, powerful whisper that filled the small room. I am offering you the most powerful, unearned gift in existence. The air crackled with the weight of his words. Izuku's heart stopped. He felt the blood drain from his face. Him? Quirkless, useless Deku? Inherit the power of All Might? It was impossible. It was a dream. It was a terrifying, beautiful, insane idea. Me? He choked out. But I'm quirkless. I'm nothing. You are not nothing. Yagi's voice boomed, a flash of the old All Might, so powerful it made the bare bulb flicker. You are the proof that a hero's heart is not a matter of genetics. You ran into danger to save a life, knowing you had nothing to offer but yourself. That is more heroic than 1,000 feats of strength performed for the sake of maintaining order. I am not looking for a perfect vessel. I am looking for a worthy heart. And I have found one. He extended a long, bony hand. I can give you the power to turn your ideals into reality. The power to challenge the warden. The power to show the world what it has lost. The choice, Izuku Midoriya, is yours. Will you accept this burden? This legacy? Izuku stared at the outstretched hand. It was thin, scarred, and trembling slightly, but it felt like the most solid, real thing in the universe. It was an anchor, offering to pull him out of the safe, shallow waters of his life and into a raging, terrifying ocean of possibility. He thought of the little girl, the explosion, the cold eyes of the DMC, the benevolent, suffocating smile of Superman. He thought of a world where people were forced to hate themselves. But before he could answer, another voice cut through the silence. A voice thick with a toxic cocktail of rage, jealousy, and utter disbelief. You've gotta be kidding me. Bakugo was on his feet. His face was pale, his hands clenched into fists at his sides, small wisps of smoke curling from his knuckles. He was staring at Yagi, then at Izuku, his crimson eyes wide with a manic, furious energy. Him? Bakugo snarled, jabbing a finger at Izuku. You're offering this legendary power to him? A quirkless, worthless pebble in the road? A nobody who just got lucky. I'm the one with the power! I'm the one who blew that monster away. I'm the one they're afraid of, and that is precisely why you are not ready, young man, Yagi said, his voice soft but firm, his gaze never leaving Izuku. The words hit Bakugo harder than the sludge monster had. His entire life, his power had been his shame and his secret pride. It was the one thing that made him more. To have it dismissed, to be told it was the very reason he was unworthy, it shattered something deep inside him. He let out a sound that was half scream, half sob. A furious, broken sound. I don't need you, he spat, his voice cracking. I don't need your stupid, hand-me-down power. And I don't need him. He turned, his movements jerky and wild. He spotted a heavy, steel-plated door at the far end of the bunker, a large wheel lock at its center. He stomped toward it, his rage giving him a strange, new purpose. Kaken, wait! Izuku cried out, taking a step after him. Yagi put a hand on Izuku's shoulder, stopping him. His expression was one of deep, profound sadness. Let him go, he said quietly. Some cages are built on the inside. He must find his own way out. Bakugo reached the door. He grabbed the rusty wheel and, with a guttural roar of pure, undiluted rage, began to turn it. The metal screamed in protest, the sound of years of disuse grinding away. It took all his strength, his muscles straining, veins popping on his neck. With a final, groaning thump, the lock disengaged. He shoved the heavy door open a crack. A sliver of the real world's gray evening light cut into the gloom of the bunker. Bakugo didn't look back. He didn't say another word. He just slipped through the opening and was gone, the heavy doors swinging shut behind him with a deep, final boom that echoed like a death knell in the sudden silence. He was out there now. Alone. A known fugitive with a power he couldn't control, hunted by the system and fueled by a rage that would surely consume him. Izuku stared at the door, his heart aching. He had run in to save Kaken, and in the end, all he had done was watch him run away into an even greater danger. He is lost for now. Yagi's voice was a soft rasp beside him. But your path is here. The world needs a new symbol. Not a symbol of orderly control, but a symbol of defiant hope. The offer still stands. Yagi's hand was still outstretched. Izuku turned away from the door and looked at the waiting hand. He looked at the dying hero offering him a chance to change the world. He was terrified. He was unworthy. He was nothing. But he was also the boy who ran in. He took a deep, shuddering breath, the dusty air of the bunker filling his lungs. He thought of Bakugo, lost in the night. He thought of the little girl with the silver rocket. He made his choice. Slowly, his own hand trembling, Izuku Midoriya reached out and took All Might's. The grip was firm, a promise of a terrible, wonderful future. I'll do it, he whispered. I accept. The handshake was a formality that ended in a cataclysm. As Izuku's trembling fingers closed around Toshinori Yagi's skeletal hand, the world ended. There was no flash of light, no clap of thunder. There was only a silent, internal detonation. One moment, he was Izuku Midoriya, a quirkless boy in a dusty bunker. The next, he was a vessel being filled with a raging, ancient sea. It felt like 1,000,000,000 volts of lightning arcing directly into his soul. Power, raw and untamed, flooded every cell of his being. It was not a gentle gift, it was a violent occupation. He felt the echoes of those who had come before, not as clear thoughts, but as phantom emotions, a woman's fierce, protective resolve, a man's grim, lonely determination, a flash of defiant joy, a surge of bone-deep sorrow. It was a chorus of ghosts screaming in his blood, a symphony of wills that threatened to tear his own consciousness apart. His knees buckled. A choked gasp escaped his lips as he collapsed, his connection with Toshinori breaking. He lay on the cold concrete floor, every nerve ending screaming, his body convulsing as if trying to expel an invading force. It felt like his bones were glowing, like his blood had been replaced with molten sun. "Breathe, my boy!" Toshinori's voice was a distant, calm lighthouse in the storm. "Do not fight it. Accept it. Make it a part of you." Izuku tried to obey. He forced air into his lungs, but the power inside him met it, fought it, a pressure building in his chest that felt like it could crack his ribs. This wasn't a quirk. This was a parasite, a god. A living, breathing legacy that was currently trying to unmake him from the inside out. He squeezed his eyes shut, his mind reeling. This is one for all, he thought, the concept a tiny raft in a hurricane. This is the weight. He had imagined the weight of a legacy as a metaphorical burden, a heavy responsibility on his shoulders. He had not understood that the weight was literal, a physical, crushing presence that threatened to pulverize him into dust. Slowly, agonizingly, the initial tidal wave of power began to recede. It did not vanish, but settled, sinking deep into his marrow. The screaming chorus of ghosts faded to a low, constant hum at the edge of his hearing. The feeling of being torn apart was replaced by a sensation of being overfull, stretched thin, a balloon inflated to the very brink of bursting. He pushed himself up, his arms trembling violently. His body felt alien, a stranger's suit that was 3 sizes too small. He looked at his hands. They looked the same, pale, freckled, a little scrawny, but he could feel it. A universe of kinetic potential lay dormant under his skin, a sleeping dragon in a shoebox. Toshinori watched him, his expression a mixture of profound empathy and grim satisfaction. He coughed, a deep, rattling sound, and wiped a speck of blood from his lips with the back of his hand. "The first step is always the hardest," he rasped. "Your body, it is a fine vessel, but it is an unplowed field. We have just planted the seed of a great oak. Now we must teach the soil how to hold the roots, lest they tear the very earth apart." The days that followed were a blur of pain, frustration, and failure. The training ground was not the forgotten bunker, which was too small and fragile. Toshinori led Izuku through a series of maintenance tunnels to a place he called the Scrapyard, officially, Kamino Ward Industrial Scrapyard 7. It was a vast, desolate landscape of forgotten things, a graveyard for the march of progress. Mountains of rusted cars were piled like fallen giants. Towers of crushed shipping containers formed jagged canyons. The air smelled of rust, oil, and the faint, metallic tang of decay. It was the perfect place to break things. And Izuku broke everything, especially himself. Toshinori's training philosophy was terrifyingly simple. "You have a nuclear reactor in your chest, my boy," he explained on the first day, standing beside a mountain of compacted cubes that were once hover cars. "Right now, your only idea of how to use it is to trigger a meltdown. This is what we call a smash. It is a desperate, final resort, a weapon of self-destruction. Our goal is not to teach you how to press the big red button. Our goal is to teach you how to safely channel a tiny fraction of that energy to power a light bulb." He picked up a microwave oven from a pile of discarded appliances, its door hanging off one hinge. "Imagine this power is an egg you place inside this microwave," he said, his analogy bizarrely domestic in the industrial wasteland. "If you turn the power to 100% for 1 second, what happens? It explodes," Izuku said, picturing the messy result. "Precisely." Toshinori's eyes gleamed. "Your limbs are the microwave. The power is the egg. Every time you try to smash, you are turning the power on full. Your body, the microwave, cannot handle the sudden, violent release of energy. It explodes along with the egg." He pointed to Izuku's arm. "Hence, broken bones. So, how do I stop it from exploding? You don't put all the energy in at once. You don't try to cook the egg," Toshinori explained. "You try to warm the water it's sitting in. You must learn to draw out a sliver of one for all, a whisper of its true potential, and let it flow through you. Not into a single point, but throughout your entire body. A constant, controlled output. A state of being, not an attack." It sounded simple. It was impossible. The first test was to move a single, rusted car door from one pile to another. "Just a small percentage," Toshinori coached from a safe distance. 1%. "Feel it." Don't command it. Coax it. Izuku took a deep breath. He focused on his right arm, picturing a tiny thread of the raging sea within him flowing down his shoulder, into his bicep, down to his hand. He reached out and touched the car door. He pulled. Crack! An explosion of force erupted from his fingertips. The car door didn't move, it disintegrated. A 5-foot hole of vaporized metal appeared where he had touched it. The shockwave threw him backward, and a searing, white-hot pain shot up his arm. He screamed, cradling his hand. 3 of his fingers were bent at sickening, unnatural angles, clearly broken. Toshinori was at his side in an instant, his face grim, pulling a medical kit from his coat. Too much. You tried to force it. It is a wild horse, young Midoriya. If you pull on the reins too hard, it will throw you. Day after day, it was the same. He tried to flick a small piece of scrap metal and instead fired it like a railgun slug, tearing a hole through a stack of washing machines 100 meters away. The recoil dislocated his shoulder. He tried to jump onto a stack of tires, and the uncontrolled burst of power from his legs shattered the asphalt beneath him and sent him rocketing 50 feet into the air, ending in a painful, uncontrolled crash into a pile of sheet metal. The pain was immense. His body was a constant canvas of bruises, scrapes, and fractures. Toshinori, with a grim proficiency that spoke of long, painful experience, would patch him up, setting bones, wrapping sprains, disinfecting cuts. But the physical pain was nothing compared to the mental anguish. He was a danger. This power, this gift, was a weapon he couldn't aim. He felt like a child holding a live grenade, constantly terrified of dropping it. Every night, he would collapse onto the bunker's cot, his body aching, his spirit frayed, and the quiet hum of One for All in his veins would feel like a mockery. I can't do it, he whispered into the dusty darkness one night, after a particularly bad day that ended with him accidentally demolishing a small, shed-sized structure. I can't control it. You chose the wrong person, Toshinori. Toshinori, sitting in his chair and reading an old, worn paperback by the light of the bare bulb, looked up. His face was tired, the shadows under his eyes deeper than usual. Did I? He asked quietly. The boy I chose ran into danger with nothing. He was willing to be broken for someone else. Now he has the power to do more, and he is afraid of being broken. The logic is flawed. I'm not afraid of the pain. Izuku shot back, sitting up, his voice cracking with frustration. I'm afraid of this. He held up his bandaged hand. This isn't a tool. It's a bomb. What if I lose control? What if I'm trying to save someone and I miss? What if I hurt them instead? What if I become just another monster, another piece of the chaos you fought against? The fear was real, a cold knot in his stomach. He was training to fight a system that condemned uncontrolled power, yet he was the most uncontrolled thing he could imagine. Toshinori closed his book, marking his page with a thin finger. He stood and walked over to the cot, his movements slow and deliberate. He sat on the edge, and the cot groaned under his weight. That fear, he said, his voice soft, is why I chose you. All for One never feared his power. The despots and tyrants I fought never feared their power. They reveled in it. Superman, he does not fear his power, because he believes it is infallible, a tool of absolute order. Your fear, young Midoriya, is not a weakness. It is your conscience. It is the single most important quality a true hero can possess. Do not let it paralyze you. Let it guide you. Let it be the wall that separates you from the monsters. He placed a hand on Izuku's shoulder. It was bony and frail, but the warmth from it was steady and reassuring. The weight of this legacy is not just the power. It is the cumulative hope of everyone who held it before you. It is the hope of everyone we are trying to save. You are not just carrying a weapon. You are carrying their future. It is heavy. It will always be heavy. But you are not carrying it alone. He stood up. Get some rest. Tomorrow, there are people you need to meet. The next day, the training was different. There was no trip to the scrapyard. Instead, Toshinori led him through a different set of tunnels, emerging into the boiler room of a dilapidated public bathhouse. From there, they went up a flight of stairs and through a door marked staff only, finding themselves in the back room of a small, nondescript noodle shop in a forgotten corner of the city. The air smelled of rich pork broth, soy sauce, and ginger. It was warm and humid. A young woman with a round, cheerful face and a cascade of brown, bobbed hair was wiping down the counter. She looked up as they entered, and a brilliant, sunny smile lit up her face. "Toshi-san! You're late. I was about to give your usual bowl to a paying customer," she teased, her voice bright and melodic. Her eyes fell on Izuku, who was hovering nervously behind the skeletal hero. Her smile softened, becoming warm and welcoming. "And you must be the new guy. It's nice to finally meet you. I'm Achiko Uraraka," she offered a hand. Izuku, startled by her friendliness, shook it. Her grip was firm. "I Izuku Midoriya. It's nice to meet you too, don't mind him, he's shy," came a new voice. It was sharp, crisp, and radiated authority. A tall, well-built young man with dark blue hair and square-rimmed glasses emerged from the kitchen, wiping his hands on an apron. He moved with a rigid, precise posture that spoke of formal training. He pushed his glasses up his nose with his middle finger, his expression serious and analytical as he scrutinized Izuku. "Tenya Ida," he introduced himself, offering a stiff, formal bow. "It is a pleasure to make your acquaintance. I trust your initial integration phase with Tashinori-sensei has been productive?" Yes, very," Izuku stammered, feeling like he was being interviewed for a job. This was the Quirk Liberation Front. Not a shadowy army of radicals, but a girl in a noodle shop and a boy who talked like a corporate manual. Tashinori gestured for them all to sit at a small booth in the back. Uraraka brought over bowls of steaming ramen, and the simple, delicious meal was a profound comfort after weeks of nutrient packs and stale bunker air. "Izuku needs to understand who he is fighting for," Tashinori said, addressing Uraraka and Ida. "He needs to know he isn't alone." Uraraka's cheerful demeanor softened into something more serious. She looked at Izuku, her brown eyes full of a quiet strength. "My family, we're not criminals," she began. "We ran a small construction company. Good work, honest work. But times got tough. When my quirk manifested zero gravity, we were terrified. We did what the law said. We registered it." She poked at her noodles with her chopsticks. "That was our mistake. The DMC classified it as a level 3 potential hazard. They said my ability to negate gravity on objects up to 3 tons could be used to disrupt infrastructure, a potential act of terrorism. They didn't care that I just wanted to help my dad lift heavy materials." The containment fees started. Yearly payments to the DMC for monitoring and potential response services. Then came the mandatory quirk counseling, the suppression therapy sessions, all billed to us, of course. It bled us dry. We lost the company. We lost our home. They didn't put us in jail. They just erased our future, one bill at a time. I joined the QLF because I want a world where a gift doesn't come with a price tag that costs you everything. As she spoke, she unconsciously touched her fingertips together, and her ramen bowl lifted an inch off the table, floating in the air. She quickly placed her fingers down, and it settled with a soft clink. It was a small, graceful act of defiance. Izuku stared at her, his heart aching. Her story was a quiet kind of violence, a bureaucratic slow strangulation that was just as brutal as a physical raid. Then, Ida spoke, his voice losing some of its formal stiffness, replaced by a low, cold anger. "I believed in the system," he said, his gaze fixed on the table. "I believed in order. I believed in the mission of the Department of Metahuman Control. I was one of their top cadets." He looked up, and the pain in his eyes was stark. "My older brother Tensei was my hero. He was a hero in everything but name. He had a powerful engine quirk. He used it to perform unofficial search and rescue during the last major earthquake. He saved dozens of lives. But he was unregistered. Someone reported him. The DMC came for him." Ida's hands clenched into fists on the table. "They didn't try to arrest him. They deemed his quirk too powerful for conventional suppression and too dangerous for public reintegration. That's the official term. They said he resisted arrest. They used a specialized weapon, a neural inhibitor. It severed the connection between his brain and his quirk, and his legs. He's paralyzed from the waist down. They broke him. They broke a hero and called it maintaining order. I saw the truth that day. The system I swore to uphold wasn't protecting people. It was pruning them. It was eliminating anyone who didn't fit into their perfect, orderly design. I deserted that night. I fight now so that no other hero has their legs cut out from under them. Silence fell over the table. The weight of their stories, their pain, pressed down on Izuku. This was the legacy. Not just the power in his veins, but the hope of these people. Uraraka's hope for a just future. Ida's hope for a world that didn't punish its heroes. Tashinori's hope for a dawn after a long, cold night. He finally understood. He had been so focused on the fear of the power, the fear of what it could do to him, or through him. He had been looking inward. But One for All wasn't about him. It was about them. It was a tool forged by their collective pain and hope. The weight was not his to carry alone. It was theirs to share. His fear didn't vanish. But it changed. It was no longer a paralyzing terror. It became a focusing lens. A sharp, clear understanding of what was at stake. Back at the scrapyard the next day, something was different. The air was colder, a storm brewing on the horizon. But inside Izuku, there was a strange calm. He stood before a massive, 4-ton block of compressed steel. A monument to his past failures. The goal is the same, Tashinori said, huddled in his coat a short distance away. Control. Izuku closed his eyes. He didn't picture an explosion. He didn't picture a threat of power. He pictured Uraraka's smile, tinged with sadness. He pictured Ida's clenched fists. He pictured his brother, Tensei, a hero he'd never met. He pictured the little girl in the alley. He pictured Bakugo, lost and alone. He wasn't trying to command a raging sea anymore. He was asking it for help. He stopped thinking of the power as an invader. He thought of it as an ally. He opened the floodgates of his own will, not to fight it, but to welcome it, to guide it. Flow through me, he thought, not into my arm. Not into my leg. Into all of me. We have work to do, and then it happened. He felt the telltale surge of One for All, but this time, it didn't rush to a single point. It spread, like blood through capillaries. It flowed from the core of his chest down every limb, to the tips of his fingers and the soles of his feet. A low, powerful hum vibrated through his entire body. His skin tingled, and crimson lines of energy, like cracks in reality, briefly traced their way across his skin before coalescing into a shimmering, emerald aura that enveloped him completely. Green lightning, no longer chaotic, but controlled, arced silently around his body. It didn't hurt. It felt right. He felt powerful, yes, but also light. Stable. The raging sea was now a swift, deep river, flowing exactly where he directed it. Tashinori. He breathed, his voice steady. He opened his eyes. He could feel the power in every fiber of his being. Not 100%. Not even 10%. A small, manageable fraction. 5%. Tashinori whispered, his eyes wide with awe and hope. My boy, you've done it! Full cowl. Izuku looked at the block of steel. He walked forward, his movements smooth and balanced. He placed both hands on its cold, rusted surface. He didn't shove. He pushed. The green aura around him flared slightly. With a deep, grinding groan of protesting metal, the 4-ton block slid 6 inches across the dirt. He pulled his hands back, the emerald aura receding but not vanishing. He was fine. His arms weren't broken. His fingers were intact. He was breathing steadily. He turned to look at Tashinori, a wide, trembling, waterlogged smile breaking across his face. Tears welled in his eyes, not of pain or frustration, but of overwhelming relief and a dawning, terrifying hope. He could do this. He looked down at his own 2 hands, still humming with the faint energy of One for All. The weight of the legacy was still there. It was heavier than he could ever have imagined, but for the first time, standing there in the heart of a junkyard with green lightning dancing around him, he felt strong enough to lift it. The power was no longer just a burden. It was a promise to Uraraka. A promise to Ida. A promise to a world that had forgotten how to hope. He was Deku, the useless one. But now, he was also the vessel for their future. And he would not let them down. The first thing Clark Kent did every morning was listen. Before the sun crested the horizon, before the bustling symphony of Metropolis began its daily performance, he would sit on the edge of his bed in his quiet, unassuming apartment, and close his eyes. It was a ritual, a moment of calibration. He would filter out the white noise of the planet, the tectonic groans of the Earth's crust, the chattering static of 1,000,000,000,000 electronic devices, the ceaseless roar of the oceans, and focus on the human frequency. He heard heartbeats. Billions of them, a frantic, delicate rhythm stretching across the globe. He heard the first sleepy murmurs of lovers in Tokyo, the whispered prayers of a grandmother in Cairo, the determined footsteps of a scientist in a Geneva laboratory working through the night. He heard the quiet hum of the orbital ring construction far above, a testament to what they could build when they worked together. He heard the gentle, rhythmic beeping of a respirator in a children's hospital in Musudafu, Japan. That last sound always gave him pause. He focused on it, his super-hearing telescoping down to a single room. The Dr. Arisugawa Memorial Wing for Quirk-Related Trauma. It had been named for a brilliant, quirkless surgeon who had been killed during the Age of Chaos by a villain whose only power was the ability to make anything he touched decay into dust. Dr. Arisugawa had been a hero, one of many whose potential had been snuffed out by the genetic lottery. In that quiet, sterile room, a little boy was sleeping. His name was Kaido. 6 years old. His body was covered in smooth, scar-like tissue, the result of a neighbor's uncontrollable energy emission quirk. The neighbor hadn't been malicious, he just had a seizure. Chaos. Unpredictable, untamable chaos. Kaido's heartbeat was steady, for now, thanks to technology developed by Wayne Stark, a human solution to a superhuman problem. Clark let out a slow, steady breath. This was why. This was the reason for the laws, for the vigilance, for his unwavering stance. It was for Kaido. It was for every child who deserved to grow up in a world where they didn't have to fear their neighbor's biology, where their success wasn't determined by a genetic anomaly, but by the content of their character. He stood and walked to the window, watching as the first rays of sunlight painted the metropolis skyline in hues of orange and gold. It was a beautiful sight, a city of steel and glass that reached for the heavens, built by human hands and human ambition. He had helped, of course. He had lifted girders, prevented disasters, and served as a deterrent to those who would seek to tear it down. But he hadn't designed it. He hadn't conceived of it. He was the shepherd, not the architect. His role was to protect the flock from the wolves, both the ones that prowled outside the fold and the ones that were sometimes, tragically, born within it. He showered, dressed in the comfortable, slightly too large suit of Clark Kent, and made his way to the Daily Planet. The walk to work was another part of his ritual. He could have flown, of course, been there in the blink of an eye. But to walk was to be among them. To hear the snippets of conversation, the complaints about the price of coffee, the excited chatter about a new deep space probe launch. It was grounding. It reminded him that he was here to serve their world, not to rule it. "Morning, Kent!" Perry White's voice boomed from his office as Clark entered the bustling newsroom. "Got a lead on that LexCorp orbital manufacturing story?" "Working on it, Chief," Clark said with a gentle smile, settling in at his desk. It was a comfortable fiction. He could have the entire story, complete with technical schematics and profit-loss projections, in a nanosecond by listening in on Lex Luthor's board meetings. But that wasn't the point. The point was the work, the diligence, the earning of the story. It was the principle he championed for the entire world. Lois Lane, a whirlwind of focused energy, paused by his desk, a steaming cup of coffee in her hand. Her sharp, intelligent eyes scanned him. "You look thoughtful this morning, Smallville. Solved world hunger before your first cup of coffee," he chuckled. "Just thinking about progress. The orbital ring. The new fusion projects in Europe. It's a good time to be human." Lois took a sip of her coffee, her expression unreadable. "Is it? Or is it a good time to be a sanctioned human? I got a tip last night. DMC raid in the Musudafu suburbs. Family of 3. Their 5-year-old daughter had a minor kinetic quirk. They relocated the entire family." Clark's posture stiffened almost imperceptibly. The law is the law, Lois. It's designed to prevent tragedies. To protect people like them, and from them. Protect them by taking a child from her home in the middle of the night? Lois countered, her voice low but intense. There's a difference between protection and oppression, Clark, and sometimes I think the line is getting blurrier every day. She didn't wait for a reply, simply patting his shoulder and moving on to her own desk, already lost in her work. Her words lingered in the air, a small, uncomfortable counterpoint to the symphony of order he so cherished. He knew Lois saw the world in shades of gray. It was what made her a brilliant reporter. He, however, had the burden and the clarity of seeing it in absolutes. He had seen what unchecked power did to civilizations on a dozen other worlds before his escape pod had ever landed in that Kansas field. Humanity, this brilliant, chaotic, fragile species, was on the right path. His path. He couldn't let them stray. The first whisper came to him around midday. He was sitting at his desk, pretending to type, while actually monitoring a delicate hostage situation in Santiago. A standard, non-quirk criminal. But beneath the din of the newsroom and the tense negotiations in Chile, he caught it. A flicker. A sound that shouldn't exist. It was from Kamino Ward, Japan. A desolate, industrial sector. It was a sound he hadn't heard on Earth in years, not since his final, brutal confrontation with All for One. It was the sound of a high-level quirk activation. But this was different. It wasn't the cacophonous, discordant shriek of All for One's stolen powers. This was a clean, focused hum, a resonance of immense kinetic potential, but controlled, contained. It was there for a moment, a spike on his internal seismograph, and then it was gone. He frowned. A latent quirk manifesting? Unlikely to be so controlled. A secret DMC training ground? Possible, but their energy signatures were catalogued and different. This felt old. It felt like an echo of a power he had helped bury. He pushed it aside, for the moment. An anomaly. He would monitor it, but then, over the next few days he heard more. Whispers on encrypted channels. Fragments of conversations from known sympathizers of the Quirk Liberation Front. They weren't the usual grumblings of discontent. There was a new tone. A spark of hope. They spoke in code, of course. Of a new asset. A flickering green light. A symbol reborn. He cross-referenced the timings of the whispers with the energy spike he had detected. They correlated. A new player was on the board. The QLF, a scattered, dying ember of a resistance movement, had found a new source of fuel. His jaw tightened. He thought of All Might. The one great failure of the New World Order. The symbol of peace, as he had called himself. A man whose intentions may have been noble, but whose methods and very existence championed the chaos they had worked so hard to contain. All Might had vanished after his final battle with All for One, presumed dead or in hiding, his power extinguished. But his ideology, the idea that individual power could be a force for justice, lingered like a poison in the fringes of society. Was this All Might's successor? A new champion for a failed idea? The thought was a cold weight in his gut. He had seen this story play out before. A charismatic figure emerges, promising liberation through power. They gather followers. They challenge the established order. It never ends in freedom. It ends in fire. It ends with children like Kaido paying the price for the ambitions of superpowered adults. He decided it was time to leave the shadows of observation. It was time for a reminder. That evening, he did not fly home. He flew up. He ascended through the clouds, the air thinning around him, the sky shifting from the soft blue of evening to the bruised purple and then the infinite, stardusted black of space. He hovered there, a silent sentinel in the void, the blue and white marble of the earth turning serenely below him. From here, he could see it all. Not the squabbles and the struggles, but the whole. The glowing networks of cities, a testament to collective intelligence. The thin, beautiful veil of the atmosphere that protected them all, regardless of their genetics. It was a perfect, fragile system. A garden that required constant, diligent tending, and he could see the weeds. A new, green weed, sprouting in the forgotten corners of the garden. He knew the QLF would be listening. They monitored all global broadcasts, searching for any sign of his attention. He closed his eyes and composed his thoughts. He would not speak as Clark Kent, the quiet reporter. He would not even speak as Superman, the rescuer. He would speak as the symbol of order, the guardian of their hard-won peace. He opened a global broadcast channel, his voice transmitted not through radio waves, but directly, a telepathic whisper into the heart of every communication device on the planet. My friends, his voice was calm, deep, and resonant, the voice of a patient father addressing his children. It filled televisions in Times Square, hollow screens in Nizudafu, and the cracked screen of a stolen tablet in a dusty noodle shop. I am speaking to you tonight not from a podium or a stage, but from a place of perspective. I am watching our world, and I am filled with pride. I see the monuments you have built not with unnatural gifts, but with sweat, with ingenuity, and with the boundless power of the human mind working in concert. You have chosen the harder path, the path of earned strength. And you are walking it with courage and dignity. He let the words hang in the silence for a moment, a foundation of praise before the warning. But this peace, this progress, is a delicate thing. It was forged in the fires of a chaotic past, a past where humanity was nearly torn apart by the very idea of unearned power, an idea that bred envy, arrogance, and destruction. An idea that led to monsters, and to the pain that still echoes in our hospitals and in our memories. His voice hardened, just a fraction, losing its warmth and gaining a core of adamantine resolve. Lately, there have been whispers. Whispers of a resurgence of this failed ideology. Whispers of a new symbol for those who would rather win a genetic lottery than contribute to the collective good. Let me be clear. This is not a path to liberation. It is a regression. It is a siren song luring you back to the rocks of chaos. In the noodle shop, Achiko Uraraka's hand tightened around her teacup. Tenya Ida pushed his glasses up his nose, his face a grim mask. In the bunker, Toshinori Yagi looked up from a schematic, his blue eyes burning with cold fire. And in the scrapyard, Izuka Midoriya, surrounded by the green lightning of full Cal 5%, froze, the weight of the world suddenly pressing down on him. To those who are being tempted by these false promises, Superman's voice continued, a direct, personal address to every hidden QLF member. I urge you to reconsider. The order we have built is your shield, the laws are your protection. Do not mistake them for a cage. True strength is found in community, in diligence, in the quiet heroism of everyday life. Not in the flashy, destructive shortcuts of a quirk. His final words were a clear, unmistakable ultimatum. They were delivered with the calm, sorrowful certainty of a parent about to deliver a necessary punishment. I am the guardian of this peace. I will not allow our shared future to be threatened by the ghosts of the past. This resurgence of quirk terrorism will be met with the full and unwavering force of my conviction. It will be stopped. Disband. Return to the fold. Help us build a better tomorrow. This is your only warning. The broadcast ended. The silence that returned was heavier than the one before it. The message was clear. The shepherd had seen the new weed growing in his garden, and he was coming to pull it out by the roots. Clark remained in orbit for a long time after the broadcast, watching the planet turn. He felt a deep, profound sorrow. He did not want this conflict. He took no joy in being an enforcer. He simply wanted them to be safe. He wanted them to be their best selves. And he, with his God's eye view, knew what their best selves were. They were human. Flawed, brilliant, striving, quirkless humans. His superhearing, still focused on Japan, picked up a new sound. It was the frantic, terrified heartbeat of a single young man, now beating a frantic rhythm in the Kamino Ward scrapyard. The boy was afraid. Good. Fear was the appropriate response. Fear could be a path back to reason. He also heard the low, determined voice of Toshinori Yagi, speaking to the boy. He couldn't make out the words, but the tone was one of encouragement. Of defiance. Clark's expression hardened. All Might, or what was left of him, was still pouring poison into their ears. He was using a child to reignite his failed war. It was not just misguided, it was cruel. He descended from the heavens, a falling star streaking across the night sky. He landed silently on the balcony of his apartment. The city lights of Metropolis spread before him like a carpet of captured stars. He walked inside and looked at the reflection of Clark Kent in the dark window pane. The glasses, the mild posture, the gentle smile. It was a good man. A kind man. But sometimes, to protect the garden, the shepherd couldn't afford to be kind. He had to be ruthless. He had delivered his warning. If they did not heed it, he would deliver the consequence. He owed that much to Kaido. He owed it to them all.